Europe, magical moments across the world.
Yeah, exactly right. It's an amazing thing when you have individuals who are as close emotionally and musically as we are for over half a century, many of us. We have a shorthand, and it's often been said it's simple, but it's not easy. And it's a privilege, actually, a very, very deep privilege to be able to play, create, perform with people you've known that long, who you've grown up with, who you've cried with, who you've laughed with, who you've virtually slept in the same beds with. And here we are all these years later. Children were when we started. I was 23, Bruce was just 24. So
wow,
it all comes down to when you're on stage, you've got this backlog, whether it's in the studio, and I refer to the studio as a stage because you're performing. You have this backlog of experience, and you still have the emotional attitude of a 14-year-old who thinks, this is the greatest thing I've ever been able to do. We all feel that. And I think it comes across. I think that's why people come seeing, keep come seeing the band. Bruce keeps coming up with the goods. Tom has done a wonderful, incredible job through the years, capturing the intimacy, the energy. There's a lot of funny stories. So many of them are in this Road Diary movie. You know, at first, when we had a screening in England, I think it was, it's a little bit like walking past an appliance store when you were a kid and you saw yourself on television. You know, there you are, and doing your thing. So it was hilarious. It was touching. It was moving. That's us. It's a little bit of an out-of-body experience. And, you know, I remember the first time I played with Bruce, and I'll be short. It was in August of 1974, and I'd been playing drums for 17 years at that point, in and out of bands, mostly in. I had never had that kind of musical experience, not only with the energy, the power that I felt coming off of Bruce, but in that room was Clarence Clemens, our beloved late saxophonist, and Dan Federici, original founding member, and Gary Talon, our bass player. And it wasn't just Bruce's dynamism and his ability to communicate what he wanted. And I'd been like something like the 60th drummer. I'm sure by that point, the last thing they wanted to do was, you know, play with all these different drummers. But it was Bruce, but it was also the way they were connecting with him, the way they were watching him so closely and pushing in the same direction. That's the hardest thing to get. There's several things that are hard to get in the band. Great singer, okay, that's checked off. Great songs, no problem. A band who shares the vision of the leader. And that perhaps can be the most difficult. And I believe it speaks to why here we're going on the second half of our journey towards 100 years together. So when they, you know, help us up the stage, and I'm 100 years old, and Bruce counts 1, 2, 3, 4, I'll be there, and so will the rest of the E Street Band.
It's really unbelievable. And Tom, talk about this documentary and what separates it from other rock documentaries and other things that longtime fans like you and me have seen before about Bruce.
Well, what makes this unique is that obviously there was a shutdown of no music. So this was a story that was dramatic right from the very start. And what's unique about it is that the film spends time with the fans, spends time with the audience that has missed this very core thing, this connection of music. So I was able to have access like no other doc that I've worked on. I was able to sit with the band after 25 years and sit with them for hours and get into stories and history that's just never been told. And it came at a very unique time. and the visuals of the stadium and the interaction of Bruce and the communication he has with his audience has never been captured this way. I had complete access, and with this one, I remember Bruce just saying, "Go deep in the vault. Let's get the full story out there." And I was able to find things that I've never shared before with the fans, which is early footage of E Street, early moments. But it's been a constant conversation, these films, with Bruce and the band and the audience.
Close out the congressional speakers to introduce to you someone who has been censured but is not silenced, Congressman Al Green.
Thank you. 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 You touched my heart. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I am proud to be here today with my colleagues, all of whom are liberated Democrats. Let's hear it for these liberated Democrats. All of whom are unbought, unbossed, and unafraid. Unafraid to stand up for the many seniors that are among us. We have seniors that are among us. Unafraid to say to Donald John Trump, hands off Medicaid and Medicare. It belongs to our seniors. Social Security is not a Ponzi scheme. It is a part of the American dream. It belongs to our seniors. And we have to tell President Trump that Canada is not going to become the 51st state. Russia invaded Ukraine. Greenland is not for sale. And he also needs to know, dear friends, that Gaza is not going to become a resort. Gaza is not going to become a resort. There must be a home for the Palestinian people. Yeah, there must be. There must be. And I'm here to speak from my heart. This message is from my heart.
It's billed as the hands-off protest, a multi-city expression of popular dissent in places ranging from Boston to New York to the nation's capital, Washington, D.C., which witnessed the largest protest since Donald Trump began his second term as president.
They think they're going to overthrow the heroes of American democracy. They don't know who they're dealing with.
So are you ready to fight? Are you ready to fight? Let's go fight and win.
This is a very different demographic from those seen in previous protests.
It's not only the young and the angry, it is the middle-aged, the elderly. Washington, D.C. has been the center of the federal government, and tens of thousands of workers have been laid off under the Trump administration.
Love, not hate, makes America great.
But it's also a sample of Americans who have been dismayed by what they view as the cruel and unfeeling policies of the president and the man he selected to lead what is called the Department of Government Efficiency, Elon Musk.
I think everybody is afflicted with what's happening right now. We have young, we have old, we have middle-aged, we have everyone here, and we've got to come together to make a difference.
The message at protests throughout the nation is constant. Don't just resist today, but do so on Monday or week and continue through the months to come. Mike Hanna, Al Jazeera, Washington.
As the impact of Donald Trump's swift and wide-ranging tariffs start to take effect. Speaking via video link at a political gathering in Italy, Elon Musk said he could see a future where there was a free trade zone between the two economies. As it stands, the EU will have to pay a 20% levy on all imports into the US. World leaders have continued to react to the new economic order, with the British Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer and the French President Emmanuel Macron promising to coordinate their positions on any retaliatory action. Meanwhile, tens of thousands of people have marched in dozens of US cities in protest against Donald Trump and his policies since his return to the White House. Well, I'm joined now by Peter Draper, the Executive Director for the Institute for International Trade at Adelaide University. Peter, thank you very much for joining us here on BBC News. Australia itself has been hit with baseline tariffs of 10%. The Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, said the nation wouldn't introduce its own tariffs in return. So what do you make of the position that Australia finds itself in now?
I think it's the correct decision that the Prime Minister has taken. Imposing our own tariffs would amount to self-harm, and that's the basic position the government has taken. And retaliating against the United States would invite further retaliations, and trying to cut some sort of special deal would be a deal with an administration that essentially can't be trusted. So there's really no good options here. And what the government is doing is to double down on its diversification strategies, which have been in place for some time, while at the same time putting in place policies to build economic and trade resilience. So I think a pretty comprehensive response and quite a defensible one.
Because Australia quite often has to navigate between its ally, the US, and the regional power of China. So how are they going to strike the balance best for the country of Australia?
Yeah, that's always a balancing act. And one should recall that a couple of years ago, China also coerced Australia. And at that time, about 40% of our exports went to China. To put that into perspective, about 5% of our exports go to the United States. So we're far less exposed to the US market, and we can therefore, outside of a few sector and product stories, particularly beef exports to the US, we can take the hit, relatively speaking. In the case of China, when they coerced us, we opted again to just double down and take the hit and diversify. And that's what most commodity exporters particularly were able to do. But the bottom line, I think, on the foreign policy front is that this Trump initiative draws the region, generally speaking, closer to China. This is a golden opportunity for China to cement its regional relationships and displace the United States in the region.
And what?
Well, it's hard to know if many people who voted for Trump turned out, but there were demonstrations in more than 1,200 cities across the U.S., and I was on the ground here in Washington at the near the Washington Monument, and there were certainly tens of thousands of people, expressing fear and anger toward Trump and Musk and Vance, principally Trump and Musk, around such a range of issues, every imaginable issue, from the attacks on democracy to tariffs free speech, social welfare programs, NATO, Ukraine, science, on and on. I could take up all our time talking about the issues. And, there was a great deal of creativity as well in the kinds of signs that people had up,
President Donald Trump's trade tariffs and the radical shakeup of U.S. politics driven by his administration. Hands-off rallies have been held in all 50 states. There's growing public anger at Trump's policies as well as Elon Musk's cost-cutting campaign.
It was the largest single day of protest since President Donald Trump returned to office in January. Under the banner Hands Off, opponents of Trump's policies rallied, from critics of his economic policies to those concerned about civil rights, to climate activists in towns and cities in all 50 states, from New York's Fifth Avenue.
I feel horrible. Immigrants are getting deported. The president's so worried about 0.1% of the population, transgender people, but he doesn't care about the economy, he doesn't talk about lowering prices, inflation.
To Charlotte, North Carolina.
I'm here today as a person with a disability to stand up for all the 70 million people in America who receive disability, who receive Medicaid or Medicare. They are important. Their voice is important.
In Houston, Texas, people came out in defiance of a tornado warning.
I'm here today to say hands off of our democracy, hands off of our rights, hands off of our futures. I was a little afraid today that the weather might scare people from coming out, but I was so delighted to see that everyone braved the rainy weather and came out to fight for our democracy.
In the capital, Washington, D.C., demonstrators congregated on the National Mall.
We object to everything that Donald Trump is doing, basically in terms of his power grab and all the damage he's doing to the economy and to democracy.
Taxes. The hands-off organizers managed to bring together a wide range of those unhappy with the government, from civil rights organizations to army veterans to LGBTQ groups to climate activists. They all had one message for the man in the Oval Office.
This is what democracy looks like. This is what democracy looks like.
For more
video behind me, the biggest protest in Chicago since President Trump took office. A significant crowd spilling out of Daley Plaza and filling up the streets of Chicago. The anti-Trump hands-off protest, as it's called, was one of hundreds taking place simultaneously nationwide. Arnold Brennan was on the ground speaking with protesters about their biggest concerns.
I haven't seen a demonstration this big in Chicago ever.
Like oceans of people.
But it looks like this entire square is full.
When a protest gets too big for Daley Plaza, people stand where they can.
In the middle of the street.
This crowd stands against President Donald Trump and billionaire Elon Musk.
We will not be silenced.
Their message is hands off.
Hands off!
A protest against the administration's actions to cut government jobs, shutter agencies, deport immigrants, impose tariffs, and more.
I am concerned about people being kidnapped off the streets and shipped to hellhole prisons. I am concerned about our economy tanking. I'm concerned about the fact that we have a president who doesn't care about people.
Things are being defunded. People are losing their jobs. Just really terrible things are happening in this country.
There's something that every single person in America cares about that these people are attacking.
This is one of more than 1,200 demonstrations happening all over the country. There are protests in all 50 states. Here in Chicago, Daley Plaza is overflowing. After speeches, the people here will hit the pavement to march.
Look at save the future of the nation right in front of the very place that saw the start of our nation. This is what the rally looked like over at City Hall, where thousands of protesters gathered at noon and then marched down here to the Liberty Bell and Independence Mall, a mass showing of unity against several Trump administration actions and policies. The demonstration, one of hundreds planned across the country, and the largest one in our area that also saw crowds gather over in Newtown and Conshohocken. The Philly protests turned into a rally in Old City that included speeches from elected officials like Congressman Brendan Boyle and Philly's first openly LGBT councilperson, Rue Landau. Protesters in Philly say they're protesting Trump and allies like Elon Musk's
Let Pennsylvania be a beacon for fair elections. And let the United States be that beacon across the world. Hands off! Hands off!
Fraud, waste, and abuse are the three words that are being used to dismantle our government. These are mistruths spread by Elon Musk and the administration trying to take away our funding.
Is now gathering to demand the president stop what they're calling an assault on families, jobs, health care, and Social Security. Eyewitness News reporter Tim Caputo live to explain this national movement dubbed Hands Off. Tim?
Joy and Michelle, you see behind me, the crowd is fairly big at this point, getting bigger by the minute. They expect about 7,000 people here in Pershing Square. And to give you a sense of just how many people are here right now, where I'm standing is kind of on the back end. Over by the palm trees up on 5th Street is where the stage is, and they filled out this entire park all the way through. And really in the last 20, 30 minutes, we've seen people at almost every street corner here in downtown LA working their way over here. So this crowd is only going to get bigger as thousands, potentially 7,000 people come out in this passionate rally against President Donald Trump and his policies in the first few months of his second term in office. It has been a sea of signs, all adamantly opposed to the president's agenda, including
Hands off! Hands off! Our democracy! Hands off! Hands off! Our social justice! Hands off! Hands off! Our economy!
Big crowds holding hands-off signs surround the Parkman bandstand. What do you want their hands off?
Everything. Women's bodies, Social Security, trans kids. I mean, he's just going after everybody.
Then groups of people with disabilities lead the way down Tremont Street to City Hall Plaza, where Boston police say 25 to 30,000 people came to hear more about today's theme.
Response to President Trump's new tariffs and the cuts to the federal government overseen by billionaire Elon Musk. It's one of the largest anti-Trump events that we've seen here in Central Texas since President Trump returned to the White House. Today we saw signs, chants, and speeches from the steps. Several state lawmakers were here and spoke, including Austin Senator Sarah Eckhart. There was a lot of attention on what Elon Musk and Doge are doing, but this wasn't really about one
violent national day of action. Event organizers say they are marching, rallying, and protesting against the actions of both President Trump and Elon Musk. The goal is to, quote, build a movement against the looting of our country. One protester tells us the administration's actions are actually working against the people.
Hands off, demonstrating against a number of policies recently put into place by the Trump administration and Elon Musk. Drastic cuts to the federal workforce and slashing federal funding across several government programs were top of the agenda. There was also opposition on other issues such as immigration and tariffs. Well, hands-off protests also happened here in the Bay Area. Oakland seniors rallied together earlier over their fears of the future of Social Security, as did veterans at the Civic Center in San Francisco. Our John Ramos spoke to one who's concerned his Social Security checks may soon stop coming.
If people were waiting for an organized pushback against the Trump administration's agenda, it came today. But it didn't come from lawmakers. It came from the people themselves. People gathered in San Francisco to speak out against Donald Trump's executive actions in a scene reminiscent of the massive protests during the Vietnam War.
I feel as intense as I did when I was 20.
Jim Sanderson remembers what it was like in 1970 when Americans lost their belief in not just a war, but the nation itself.
That was a very, it was tearing us apart, and the war and all that. I feel like that again, but now the enemy's from within.
Thousands of people filled the street and plaza in front of City Hall, their faces reflecting a full range of life experiences and concerns.
Thank you for reminding us that sometimes the only way to be heard is to disrupt the status quo.
In the front row was May Alice from the East Bay. She, like a lot of people, is concerned about the possibility of cuts to Social Security. But she thinks it's less likely to happen if people turn out in numbers like this.
There isn't anybody that doesn't have a mom or a dad or a grandma or grandpa on Social Security. I don't think it's actually going to be actualized. I don't, because there's 70 million people that will hit the streets and throw this guy into a dumpster, you know?
The so-called hands-off rallies were organized by...
Well, but look what they have tucked into their pockets. They have little American flags just below the flag of their own countries sewn onto their sleeves. In the capital city of Lithuania yesterday, thousands of soldiers and dignitaries, and also just ordinary people, lined up in the streets to pay their respects and to honor 4 American soldiers who died in Lithuania this past week during a training exercise. The ceremony was attended by the president of Lithuania, who gave a speech on the occasion. He said that for Lithuanians, serving your country is not just a duty, but an emotion. And you could really see that among the people who gathered. Lithuanian citizens were moved to tears, moved to genuine grief. But again, this was a ceremony for Americans, for American soldiers. Officials arranged for an archbishop to bless the motorcade before it drove to the airport to start the process of returning those remains, returning those soldiers to the U.S. In our country, of course, it is a sacred tradition that when members of the armed services die in the line of duty overseas, their remains come home to the U.S. in what's called a dignified transfer. Their remains are flown home specifically to Dover Air Base with American flags draped over the coffins. It's a very somber, very important, very serious, very specific ceremony. And a dignified transfer is often attended by the President of the United States as a sign of respect from the Commander-in-Chief. After that very moving send-off from Lithuania and from the government and the people of Lithuania, the White House announced here in the United States that when those 4 young fallen American soldiers landed back home here in the U.S., President Donald Trump would not attend the dignified transfer. He would not be waiting at Dover to pay respects to the service members who died, even as Lithuania's president made sure he was there to see them off. Donald Trump has decided instead that he's going to Florida to watch a golf tournament and to go to a golf dinner tonight. You know, given his previous comments, I guess you could say this is consistent with his apparent level of investment on this issue. I got to tell you, we do not play a lot of
consumers, and I'm not a fan of jacking up taxes on American consumers. So my hope is these tariffs are short-lived and they serve as leverage to lower tariffs across the globe.
That is his hope. Republicans on the Hill are uncomfortable, as you can see, as Donald Trump's tariffs continue to anger our trade partners and send the markets into a tailspin. But are they uncomfortable enough to actually do anything to rein the president in? Joining us now, Democratic Senator Amy Klobuchar, who represents the state of Minnesota. She's also the ranking member of the Senate Committee on Agriculture. Good to have you.
Thanks, Katie. I was thinking the same thing as I heard Ted.
As additional tariffs are set to go into effect, and the battle of the March Madness titans, UConn overwhelmed South Carolina, taking their 12th national title. 1st. At least 18 people have now died in that devastating days-long storm. Powerful winds, more than 90 reported tornadoes, several twisters touching down, ripping roofs off of homes, reducing entire neighborhoods to rubble. The new flood warnings tonight. Morgan Norwood reports from Memphis, and our weather team times out the forecast. The news just in: UConn is back, defeating South Carolina to become the new
Over 1 million people took to the streets Saturday in the largest protest since President Trump returned to the White House. More than 1,400 demonstrations under the banner of Hands Off took place across all 50 states, as well as in countries across the world. In the United States, organizers said turnout was far higher than expected. Some of the largest protests were held in Washington, D.C., New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, Denver, Boston, Philadelphia, and Atlanta. In D.C., speakers included Democratic Congressmember Ilhan Omar of Minnesota.
We are currently living through a president who wants to be a dictator. In America, we do not accept dictators and we do not accept kings. We have a billionaire who has bought a seat next to the president, using him as a puppet. American democracy has never been for sale, and it won't be today.
Anu Gujoshi of American Civil Liberties Union also spoke at the Hands Off rally in Washington.
The unconscionable and unconstitutional arrests of international students and scholars should alarm every one of us. ICE has illegally snatched people from their homes and neighborhoods, threatened their legal status, and sent them across the country with no notice to their loved ones or their lawyers. All of this in direct retaliation for constitutionally protected speech. The government cannot punish us because they don't like what we say.
In Washington, D.C., thousands also took part in a Stop the Genocide rally to protest U.S. support for Israel's war in Gaza. This all came as President Trump spent another weekend golfing in Florida. We'll hear more voices from the protests later in the broadcast. Global stocks are continuing to fall, and fears of a recession are growing after Donald Trump rejected calls to scale back his order to institute sweeping tariffs on most of the world. In Hong Kong, stocks fell today by 13%, the biggest single-day drop since the 1997 Asian financial crisis. Taiwan's main stock index had its worst day since 1990. On Wall Street, $6.6 trillion was wiped out Thursday and Friday. Trump's defending his tariffs plan, telling reporters, quote, "Sometimes you have to take medicine to fix something," unquote. But there appears to be growing divisions within the Trump administration over the tariff plan. Trump's billionaire advisor, Elon Musk, the world's richest man, says he wants to see the U.S. and Europe have zero tariffs. Musk has also publicly criticized Trump trade advisor Peter Navarro. Another billionaire Trump backer, Bill Ackman, has warned Trump's tariffs could lead to an economic nuclear winter. We'll have more on this story later in the broadcast. In Gaza, Israel's killed at least 56 Palestinians over the past 24 hours as Israel expands its ground invasion. Overnight, Israel struck a tent housing journalists near Nasser Hospital in Khan Yunis. The blast set off a fire that killed 2 people, including the journalist Helmi Al-Fakawi, who was burned alive. Another journalist, Hassan Eslaya, was seriously wounded in the attack. Meanwhile, outrage is growing over Israel's killing of 15 Palestinian medics and emergency workers in Gaza, who were discovered in an unmarked mass grave last week. Footage recovered of the attack show the ambulances in the convoy had their lights on when Israeli troops opened fire. Israel initially claimed the convoy had suspiciously approached the troops with their lights off. On Saturday, the longtime Palestinian politician and Dr. Mustafa Barghouti marched in a protest in Ramallah in the occupied West Bank.
The Israeli army committed a terrible war crime by attacking first aid providers and medics in the Red Crescent Society while they were in their ambulances clearly marked with their sirens on, with their lights on. Nevertheless, they attacked them and killed them one after the other. And after killing them, and maybe some of them were still wounded, they buried them with sand, they and their ambulances. What the Israeli army did in Rafah, and that's what New York Times have exposed, was a terrible war crime.
In other news from Gaza, health officials are warning at least 600,000 children in Gaza at risk of permanent paralysis because Israel's barring the entry of polio vaccines to Gaza as part of its broader blockade. According to the UN relief agency UNRWA, Israeli attacks have killed or injured at least 100 children in Gaza every day since Israel broke the ceasefire in mid-March. This comes as President Trump's hosting Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu at the White House today. Netanyahu took a longer-than-usual flight path from Hungary to avoid flying over countries, including Ireland and Iceland, that might enforce an arrest warrant from the International Criminal Court if the plane had to make an emergency landing. In the occupied West Bank, Israeli soldiers have shot dead a 14-year-old Palestinian-American boy named Omar Mohammed Rabia during a raid near the town of Turmasaya. 2 other Palestinian-American boys, aged 14 and 15, were injured. The Palestinian Foreign Ministry condemned what it called the extrajudicial killing of the boy, who is a U.S. citizen. Israel acknowledged shooting the boys, who they accused of throwing rocks. Meanwhile, Reuters is reporting the Trump administration's moving forward with a plan to send 20,000 assault rifles to Israel. The Biden administration had paused the shipment out of fear the guns could end up in the hands of violent Israeli settlers. The UK's Foreign Secretary condemned Israel's refusal to allow entry to 2 members of the British Parliament as, quote, unacceptable, counterproductive, and deeply concerning, unquote. The 2 Labour lawmakers, Yuan Yang and Abdissam Mohammed, arrived back in London after being deported from Israel on Sunday. They've been planning to visit aid projects in the occupied West Bank as part of a British parliamentary delegation. Israel accused the lawmakers of planning to document Israeli security forces and supporting boycotts and sanctions against Israel and Israeli officials. In Burma, which is also known as Myanmar, heavy rains and winds this week are expected to disrupt rescue and relief operations as many people continue to sleep in open air after losing their homes in the March 28th earthquake. The death toll has topped 3,500 people. Over 5,000 have been injured. In Mandalay, residents say they're still awaiting assistance from the military government after our areas were wiped out by a fire that was triggered by the earthquake.
The fireball emerged from the ground immediately just after the earthquake. It was a big fire. There were barely minutes between the earthquake and the fire. The fire spread out across the district and wiped out all 400 houses. Everybody ran away and now nothing remains. We are in deep trouble.
Meanwhile, the Trump administration reportedly fired the 3 USAID officials it sent to Burma following the earthquake while they were in Mandalay to assess the situation. It's part of President Trump and Elon Musk's plan to completely dismantle USAID. A Russian attack on Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's hometown of Kryvyi Rih killed at least 19 people, including 9 children, including some who were at a playground. Over 70 people were injured. The UN's top human rights official, Volker Turk, condemned what he called Russia's, quote, reckless disregard for civil life, unquote. The Russian Defense Ministry claimed the strike targeted a meeting of unit commanders and Western instructors. Zelensky criticized Russia again for not agreeing to an unconditional ceasefire.
Ukraine has accepted the American proposal, the proposal of a full unconditional ceasefire. Putin has rejected it. We are waiting for the U.S. reaction. So far, there has been none.
In the Democratic Republic of the Congo, severe flooding has killed at least 33 people in the capital, Kinshasa, destroyed homes and roads. This comes as the east of the country suffering worsening security and humanitarian crises as M23 fighters have advanced in North and South Kivu provinces. Some 7,000 people have been killed. Millions have been forced to flee their homes in recent months. A Trump administration official said last week the U.S. and the DRC are nearing a deal that would allow U.S. companies to exploit Congo's reserves of valuable minerals, including cobalt and lithium, in exchange for providing security. The U.S. is continuing to carry out airstrikes on Yemen. On Sunday, Yemeni health officials said at least 4 people were killed in a U.S. strike on a home in Sana'a. More than 20 people were injured, including women and children. Meanwhile, President Trump posted a video online of an earlier U.S. strike in Yemen. The video shows a blast hitting over 70 people standing in an oval formation. Trump claimed the people targeted were Houthis preparing to carry out an attack. But according to reports in Yemen, the blast actually hit a tribal gathering to celebrate Eid al-Fitr, the end of Ramadan. The Trump administration's launched near-daily attacks on Yemen since mid-March, when the Houthis resumed attacks on ships in the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden in solidarity with Palestinians in Gaza. A federal judge has accused the Trump administration of committing a grievous error that shocks the conscience by expelling Kilmar Abrego Garcia, a Maryland father, to a notorious prison in El Salvador, even though the man was under a court order not to be sent back to El Salvador. In a ruling on Sunday, federal judge Paulachinis wrote, quote, defendant seized Abrego Garcia without any lawful authority, held him in 3 separate domestic detention centers without legal basis, failed to present him to any immigration judge or officer, and forcibly transported him to El Salvador in direct contravention of the Immigration and Nationality Act, unquote. Judge Chinis has ordered the Trump administration to bring him back by midnight tonight. On Friday, Abrego Garcia's wife, Jennifer Vasquez Suras, spoke briefly to the press in Maryland.
I want to say thank you to everyone that has helped us, that has supported us in fighting this, and we will continue fighting for Kilmar, for my husband. Thank you.
The Trump administration is now claiming there's nothing it can do to bring Kilmar Abrego Garcia back home. Meanwhile, the Justice Department has placed a senior immigration lawyer on indefinite leave after he acknowledged in court Friday the Trump administration had made a mistake in sending Abrego Garcia back to El Salvador. The lawyer, Erez Riveni, had worked for the Justice Department for 15 years. Secretary of State Marco Rubio says the U.S. is revoking all visas held by South Sudanese nationals in response to the government of South Sudan not accepting citizens recently removed from the U.S. The U.S. will also stop issuing visas for South Sudanese passport holders. A number of citizens of South Sudan are currently in the U.S. under temporary protected status, but this is set to expire May 3rd. This comes as many fear South Sudan may on the cusp of a new civil war as a power-sharing deal between government rivals recently collapsed, and the first president, Riek Machar, remains under house arrest. In other immigration news, a Chinese woman has died by suicide at a Border Patrol station in Yuma, Arizona, after she was detained for overstaying her visa. Democratic Congressmember Pramila Jayapal of Washington blasted the Border Patrol amidst reports the agents failed to conduct welfare checks on the woman. The Trump administration is escalating its targeting of international university students. In recent days, U.S. Department of Homeland Security revoked visas for a number of students and recent graduates at the University of Michigan, University of California, Berkeley, Stanford, UMass Amherst, Harvard, Arizona State University, Colorado State University, and the University of Colorado and other schools. Meanwhile, the Trump administration is threatening to pause $510 million in federal funding from Brown University. Days of major storms and flooding have killed at least 18 people across southern and midwestern U.S. states, with the highest number of deaths recorded in Tennessee. Other hard-hit states include Kentucky, Arkansas, Ohio, Missouri, Mississippi, and Alabama. The deadly storms come as the National Weather Service has become severely understaffed following cuts by the Trump administration. In environmental news, on Thursday, the Trump administration removed federal protections for over half the land managed by the U.S. Forest Service, opening vast areas up to logging. Health Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. attended the West Texas funeral Sunday of an 8-year-old girl who died of measles. She was not vaccinated and is the second known measles death in Texas amid the current outbreak. Texas has reported over 480 cases, many of them affecting members of the Mennonite community, which has lower rates of vaccination than the general public. During his visit to the epicenter of the outbreak, RFK Jr. posted on social media, quote, "The most effective way to prevent the spread of measles is the MMR vaccine," unquote. It's his most direct comments on the vaccine yet, even as he continues to also promote unproven treatments, including vitamin A. And the director of the National Museum of African American History and Culture left his post Friday. Kevin Young had led the groundbreaking Washington, D.C. institution since 2021 and comes amidst Trump's campaign to completely overhaul the Smithsonian and its landmark museums and cultural institutions. Last month, Trump issued an executive order accusing the Smithsonian of promoting a, quote, divisive race-centered ideology. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, Democracy Now!
And this appears to be President Trump's efforts to try to quell any rebellion before it really erupts within the GOP.
Right. You know, it's interesting. We heard from Ron Johnson, who's, of course, hearing from farmers. We've heard for a week now a lot of farmers may be one bad crop away from bankruptcy. They can't afford this right now. We heard from Ted Cruz. Of course, oil continues to spiral downward towards 60. You get below that, that is going to be a recession for oil producers. And this guidance from the White House this morning to several news sources, their message, their pitch on how they will correct for decades of taking advantage of the American consumer. But for businesses looking for certainty, the message is clear. Don't wait. Come build in America. That was to Axios and other news outlets. So if you look at White House guidance this morning, even as the markets continue to go downward for going to be a third rough day, their guidance is, and the president's there, head down. We're going to keep moving forward, and our phone lines are open if you want to do a deal.
Let's bring in NBC News senior business analyst and host of the 11th Hour, Stephanie Ruhle. NBC News national affairs analyst and a partner and chief political columnist at Pike, John Heilman, and co-anchor of CNBC's Squawk Box and a New York Times columnist, Andrew Ross Sorkin. Andrew, I'll start with you as we're looking at these numbers and what will happen today. What are your biggest concerns? What are you watching? And for the Americans that are really hurting right now, I'm just wondering if being called names and being dubbed panicans is really the right way to go.
Weekend just on the phone with so many business leaders, investors, and others, and I don't think to a man there's somebody who looks at this and doesn't say this is a man-made disaster. It could, of course, be ended with a tweet, but that does not seem likely. And so then the question becomes, what's the off-ramp? Part of the discussion is what you just, or debate is what you just described, which is the White House trying to bring back jobs to America? Are they trying to raise revenue from tariffs as a form of taxes? Are they trying to get to zero or even less than zero for some kind of free trade program? All those issues are at odds with each other. Now, I just spoke to Peter Navarro literally in the last 5-10 minutes now, and he effectively is trying to get jobs to come back to America. Well, if that's the case, these tariffs are staying, and they will likely be here for quite a long time, irrespective of who calls up on the phone and says that they want to change the tariff program. So it's very hard to look at this situation, both in terms of what the marketplace is doing right now, in terms of stocks coming down, with that turning around in any meaningful way. And even if tariffs were to come off or there were some deals being made, it is possible that the stock market does a little bit better than where it is today. But it is possible also that the toothpaste is out of the tube, folks, at this point in the ball game, and that no matter what, the economics of companies and countries doing business with the U.S. has fundamentally changed, at least for the foreseeable future.
You know, it's fascinating. You look at the reaction Andrew's talking about. Everybody you talk to on Wall Street, investors, business class, say, yeah, they all think this is a man-made disaster. It is interesting to look at some conservatives. You've got Charles Koch, who's leading a lawsuit to actually overturn these. Right. And you also have Ben Shapiro saying that they're unconstitutional. People on the right that are out there. Ted Cruz, of course, very concerned about what's happening, price of oil in Texas. But you go through all of this, and I guess, Steph, the ones that surprised me the most are the ones who were shocked that Donald Trump did what Donald Trump said he was doing. And I'm looking, and I have been looking all morning at Bill Ackman. Shocked. This may lead to a nuclear winter when I don't know. At some point, something happened where I don't know. He decided that, you know, he was going to be the voice against Woke Inc. And he went all in with Donald Trump, and now he's acting shocked with what he's getting. And my point's been there's a way to push back against woke on college campuses without going all in with something that he says now will cause a nuclear winter. And Elon Musk now basically pleading for what? You know, free trade zones between the EU and America. How could they not have seen this coming?
I mean, to Bill Ackman, I guess I would say technically, brother, please, you have a deep understanding of how markets work. And it's even extraordinary. You know, last night he came out and basically said, you know, this is terrible. He went after Howard Lutnick. He claimed that Howard Lutnick doesn't mind that the stock market is crashing because his own firm, Cantor Fitzgerald, is long bonds, i.e. they're betting against the economy. And he said we should never have somebody in a position of influence that way that's so conflicted. Really? You think that today? You just woke up to that? And then this morning he woke up and said, you know what? Maybe I was too hard on Howard Lutnick. He's doing the best he can. That right there is a reminder. The most important thing that's been lost here, Joe, is trust. This administration can't even articulate why they're putting the tariffs on. Andrew just mentioned Peter Navarro, who makes it clear these tariffs are going to be on for the long haul because they believe we're going to be getting trillions of dollars into this country because of the tariffs. Well, that flies in direct opposition to what Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent says, that tariffs are being used as a negotiating tactic. So if you're a business, if you're an investor, either one, how do you make any plans? And plans are about trust. If you're another country, you can no longer look at the United States as a long-term trusted partner. Or if you're a company here, are you going to build a factory? Well, it takes 3 to 5 years to do that. And by then, we don't know who's going to be president or where these tariffs are going to be. And so when you lose that trust, remember when all of us talked about the risk of losing our democracy, the threat to democracy during the campaign, and everyone laughed at us being alarmist? Well, when suddenly you cannot trust the United States and you can't trust the fact that Congress is no longer the one making the laws. When you have a president who is setting policy willy-nilly by executive order, how on earth can you trust that country? How can you trust them to be your long-term partner? The answer is you can't. It's why you're seeing so many countries start to align themselves or get closer to our actual adversary, China, which is who we should be aligning with our allies against.
Well, yeah, China's going to get the windfall from this. There's no doubt about it. If there's a windfall to be had, if we don't pull back, China and also the EU, chances are good we'll get a big windfall from this as well. It's interesting, though. This is what we talked about during the campaign over and over again. And I said at points, I said, okay, we're talking a lot about democracy. Let's talk about, John Heilman, American capitalism. And I kept asking why CEOs who need stability. We need stability in the markets. We need this. We need that. Why they were all lining up behind a candidate who has supported tariffs since 1987. And it reminds me of a conversation Mike Barnicle had with somebody that's known Donald Trump for decades. And the person said to Barnicle, I can't believe he's going along with this. And Mike Barnicle goes, what are you talking about? Donald Trump's the president. Donald Trump's in charge. And outside of, say, Peter Navarro, who is a true believer, nobody else believes in this. Like, Scott Bessent looks like extraordinarily uncomfortable every time he talks about tariffs for a reason. Like, This is what Donald Trump's been promising to do since 1987. So how could these people that backed him in the campaign be shocked that this is what he's doing?
Joe, I'd like to ask you and Mika, how many times in the course of 2024, when on this program, you, one of the two of you, or both of you, or others, said about Donald Trump's plans in general, but specifically his economic plans, we said, you know, we really should listen to what he's saying because he's going to actually do these things now. He's not going to be constrained by the need to get reelected. He's going to be freed. He's going to be different in Trump 2.0 than he was in 1.0. How many people said to you that you had Trump derangement syndrome?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
yeah, John, you're exactly right. And the thing is,
hundreds?
also after the election,
hundreds,
just nonstop. But after the election, we got literally 20 minutes of warnings after the election about be very careful with this economy. Right. It's the strongest in the world, but we have three bubbles. And I talked about the three bubbles. I said Wall Street's a bubble. There's a reason why Warren Buffett is in all cash right now. So Wall Street's a bubble, crypto's a bubble, and our fiscal house is a mess. It's a bubble as well. Please be very careful. I've got 10, 20, 30 minutes of us saying just that. Please be careful, because if you're not, these bubbles are going to burst, and it's going to be working Americans who are going to be hurt the most. John?
So here's the thing that Andrew and Stephanie will know this better than I do, although I have a pretty decent sense of it. I think part of the answer, Joe, is that unlike us political people who looked at the situation, listened to what Trump was saying in 2024 on the campaign trail, and said, you know, he's going to have a more radical second term than his first term because of the fact that he does not face these political constraints, and he's motivated by this sense of grievance. In terms of international economics, he's motivated by this long-standing sense of grievance against the world, where he thinks we've been taken advantage of. We all said he's going to be different in Trump 2.0, and Andrew and Stephanie, I think, would say that people on Wall Street and in business broadly, when you talk to them about his economic agenda, would say it wasn't so bad in the first term. And you know, he said he was in favor of tariffs since 1987. We had a limited trade war in the first term, but the economy was good in his first term. And we just don't believe you or him when he says he's going to do something more radical in Trump 2.0. They were looking at Trump 1.0 and thought we would just see a replay of that in these 4 years. And it turned out that people who recognized that the lack of political constraints would affect his economic agenda, as well as his agenda on everything else, that we, in fact, were not deranged, but we were right. And people who are on Wall Street, people like Bill Ackman and other people who thought they knew better, are being proven dramatically wrong. Right. But I turn over to my friends who talk to Wall Street people and business people all day long.
So I would first say what's extraordinary is they really thought that Donald Trump was going to be great for the economy. They thought he was going to be great for markets. And so many of them were sort of blinded by this idea that, like, we're so sick of the last 4 years spending so much time talking about diversity and DEI. I'm sick of being in a DEI war room talking about how we're going to improve DEI planning meeting. They're in a tariff war room day in and day out, and they're eating crow. And while they eat crow, they've lost the ability to even stand up and speak out. And I'll tell you, all of you, what's the most alarming, and it's certainly alarming to foreign leaders, is that no CEOs are standing up and speaking out. The fact that we're not hearing from any of them shows that democracy is lost. Why? Because Donald Trump will seek vengeance on them. So in the same way the legal industry had to bend the knee, and people are looking at them and they're obviously saying barely anything. I'll ask Andrew. Andrew, what major CEOs, what bank leaders are on CNBC today walking through the impact of these tariffs? And I'm guessing you've got some, but not the biggest names in the markets, because they're too afraid to speak, despite the fact that we're facing the biggest economic policy shift that could roil our markets and cause recession. How many of them are on CNBC speaking today?
You are 100% right. You're 100% right. I said you're 100% right. The only CEOs, the only executives that are prepared to speak out right now his own crow, and others who basically work for themselves. The big publicly traded CEO companies that are run by CEOs do not want to speak out. Will they get on the phone and say, this is crazy, Andrew? This is cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs? Can you believe it? Are you going to say on TV that it's cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs? You should. And here we are. But they're not, because they are scared. They are fearful of what the repercussion on them is going to be. And that's a lot of what we saw, or what the president was doing in the first couple of weeks of his administration, that frankly scared them into being silent. That is actually a real fear. One other point I just want to make, because it's an important one. As this negotiation plays out, in a way, it's playing into the hands of our adversaries and of the folks that you would want to make a deal with if you could, which is to say that as I was talking with leaders and folks around some of the leaders of other countries this weekend, one of the things they say is, as the stock market in the United States continues to fall, it's going to actually put pressure on this administration, putting them in a better negotiating position. And some of them, by the way, are just waiting for the courts. Some of them are saying, let's just see how the U.S. courts deal with this first. Maybe Congress is going to deal with this. So it's not so clear that the longer this plays out, somehow the the strength and the negotiating hand that the Trump administration has gets stronger. In fact, in many cases, it may get weaker.
All right, CNBC's Andrew Ross Sorkin, we know you have a lot to do today. Thank you. Reaction, not just today, this morning, but all weekend long. And I think ending this part of the conversation where we started, where Stephanie was talking about a loss of trust in the U.S. How does that have consequences beyond economies?
Look, I think that's the important point at the moment. There's a kind of short-term consequence of this and a long-term consequence of this. Even if Donald Trump does what Zanny suggested earlier on the program he might do, he delays the implementation of some of these tariffs. As Andrew put it, the toothpaste is already out of the tube. You've got a lot of countries around the world, whether it's because of the early reaction to Mexico and Canada that really shocked America's allies straight after Donald Trump came into office. You've got other allies and trading partners now saying to themselves, we have no choice but to look elsewhere. This is not the United States that we knew. And as Mark Carney has said, that relationship is over. So they're going to try and think, how do we get round Fortress America? Stephanie, you know this. Donald Trump's calculation is that American market is so big, I've had it said to me by people around President Trump, that people should pay to have access to it. But other countries in Europe, in Asia, in the Middle East, in Latin America are now going to be thinking to themselves, hold on a second, if America is now walling itself off, if it is Brexiting itself, if you like, from the global economy, we still believe in free trade. Let's see who else we can have those free trade arrangements to. And to Andrew's point, that just makes America weaker, not just in the short term as this market crashes, but in the long term too, doesn't it?
It certainly does. And I would just say the thing that's really alarming about what our government is doing is think about this weekend. Over this weekend, I was talking to former colleagues of mine from Deutsche Bank saying, compare this weekend to where we were in 2008, right? That famous 2008 weekend when traders were flooding back to trading desks to figure out what was their counterparty exposure to all other banks out there. How bad was it going to be? Well, we'll juxtapose that with all the traders flooding back to their trading desks last night. You know what the big difference was between last night and 2008? In 2008, the government was spending the weekend frantically figuring out how to save us. And what happened this weekend? The president was playing golf and sending out tweets that were wildly disconnected from reality. That's the difference. You make an investment based on those changes.
All right, Stephanie Ruhle, thank you very much. We'll be watching the 11th hour weeknights at 11 p.m. Eastern right here on MSNBC.
And on the other side of the break, I'm going to be going to John Heilman, also John Lemire, reporting on what Republicans are doing on the Hill to possibly curb some of the president's power on tariffs.
All right, coming up, we'll have the latest on the Maryland man who the DOJ...
done any of this. Let me just, I just want to be clear about this. And that imagine if I had pulled Fox News' credentials from the White House press corps. It's unimaginable that the same parties that are silent now would have tolerated behavior like that from me, or a whole bunch of my predecessors.
That's just some of what former President Barack Obama told an audience last week at Hamilton College. And to his point of, imagine if he did it, there's this next story. A federal judge has ordered the U.S. government to return the Maryland man who was mistakenly deported to El Salvador's notorious mega prison. In a scathing 22-page decision yesterday, Judge Paula Zenas wrote that federal officials had acted without legal basis when they arrested Kilmar Abrego Garcia and put him on a plane without due process, adding that his detention appears wholly lawless. The judge also argued that the Trump administration's notion that it does not have the power to return Abrego Garcia to the U.S., quote, rings hollow, and that this is more about their lack of desire to do so. According to the court order, Abrego Garcia must be returned back to America by 11:59 p.m. Eastern today. The White House officials argue that he is a member of the MS-13 gang and that the judge does not have the jurisdiction to override his deportation. Back in 2019, an immigration judge granted Abrego Garcia protection from deportation to El Salvador after finding him credible and ruling that he faced likely persecution if he returned there. Here's what Attorney General Pam Bondi had to say about this case.
ICE has testified, members of ICE, that he is an MS-13 gang member. We have to rely on what ICE says. We have to rely on what Homeland Security says. They're our clients. And I firmly believe in the work they are doing, and we're going to make America safe again. That was President Trump's directive to all of us. And our jails are full of people. We want to send these people out of our country when possible.
Let's bring in former state attorney for Palm Beach County, Dave Ehrenberg. Dave, good to see you this morning. And wanted to check on two parts of this. First, whether you're simply your analysis of the judge's ruling. And then secondly, the administration's claim that, she has no jurisdiction to bring someone back from El Salvador. And frankly, they just seem flatly uninterested in doing so, almost defying her, saying, well, you have no authority over what happens there.
Jonathan, it is a bedrock legal principle in the MAGA world that the executive branch dominates over the other two branches of government. You combine that with the once fringe unitary executive theory, which says that the president possesses the sole authority over the executive branch, and here we are in this moment. And it's also why the president is arguing that the Alien Entities Act gives him the sole power to decide issues of national security and foreign relations without any judicial oversight. But, the Constitution is a stubborn thing, and there's a system of checks and balances that we have to prevent against tyranny. And so even though the legislative branch, for the first time in our history, Jonathan, has decided to emasculate itself and give all its power to the executive branch, the judges like Paula Zenas in this case are rejecting Trump's claim that judges have no juice. Judge Zenas also, as you said, correctly rejected Trump's claim that since Abrego Garcia is in El Salvador, that the administration is powerless to get him back. See, that's where Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem stepped in it, because she said publicly that this Salvadoran detention center was one of the tools in our toolkit. Well, if you own these tools, you're also responsible for what you do with them. And that's why the judge said that Abrego Garcia must be brought back today. To me, Jonathan, the big question is, what happens if he's not?
Yeah, I totally agree. This is a real test. We keep hearing from the administration, no, we're not defying court orders. We're not defying court orders. If they don't bring him back by midnight, they'll have done just that. And Dave Ehrenberg, related, I wanted to get you on another matter. Last night on Air Force One, President Trump fielded questions from reporters, one of which was the president of El Salvador has offered to take American citizens from the U.S. prison population and house them there instead. And at least in this exchange on the plane last night, President Trump said he seemed open to it. Give us your reaction. What legal barriers, and there must be, I would hope, many, would prevent him from sending U.S. citizens, no matter what they're accused or convicted of, to a foreign gulag?
Yeah, we're essentially trying to outsource our criminal justice system with that, and there are limitations. Due process applies even if you're not a U.S. citizen. There's a case back in 2004, Rasul versus Bush. This was after President George W. Bush went around the world to round up through the American military the individuals who supposedly were involved with 9/11 and sent them to Gitmo. Well, the Supreme Court ruled that even then, there are due process protections, and that the federal courts have always had the power to hear challenges involving executive branch detention in wartime and in peace. So, the president may try to outsource our criminal justice system or our foreign policy, national security stuff to El Salvador, but it won't alleviate the ability of the courts to step in and provide oversight. Article 3 gives a lot of power to the judges, and they're not going to give that up easily.
Former state attorney for Palm Beach County, Florida, Dave Ehrenberg. Dave thanked Trump last night on Air Force One.
Back to El Salvador, the president there said he would be willing to take American citizens in the federal prison population. Is that one of the ideas you're going to be discussing?
Well, I love that. If we could take some of our 20-time wise guys that push people into subways and that hit people over the back of the head and that purposely run people over in cars, if he would take them, I'd be honored to give them. I don't know what the law says on that, but I can't imagine the law would say anything different. If they can house these horrible criminals for a lot less money than it costs us, I'm all for it. But I'd only do according to the law.
So that was the president of the United States saying, I love that idea about American citizens potentially being sent to prisons overseas, including that notorious prison in El Salvador. Joe Mika, certainly a storyline we'll keep an eye on. But right now, of course, the economy remains top of mind.
Yep, the markets have once again opened with major losses this morning. There it is. Let's bring in CNBC senior markets correspondent Dom Chu. Dom, what are you watching here?
All right, so Mika, Joe, Jonathan, as we're watching another 1,300-point drop as we see things in the Dow developing right now, it's kind of important to put some of the context around it. In the 2 days since really the tariff announcements have come out, and we've seen that 2-day market reaction for Thursday and Friday, data from S&P Dow Jones Indices now shows that 2-day drop in market value at just around nearly $6 trillion from the U.S. market wiped out. If you look at it from the record highs that we saw back on February 19th, that same data shows a nearly $11 trillion drop in the value of the stock market here in America since those record highs. Now, as you talk about what's happening today, we're seeing the follow through from what happened over the last couple of days, but a lot of it is due to this idea that there is still this notion people don't understand what the real effects of these tariff policies will be on not just the U.S. economy, but the global economy overall. That macro concern and that uncertainty is at least triggering some investors and some traders to rethink the assumptions behind what they think companies are actually worth. For that reason, you've seen a number of analysts and economists across Wall Street start to ratchet up their expectations for the odds of a recession. Of course, in a recessionary environment, when the economy is slowing down or actually shrinking in some cases, you have a scenario where the value of companies, the value of the economy goes down. If that is the case, then markets go down with them. The issue that right now that a lot of folks are dealing with is this kind of where does the administration blink, or where does the Fed maybe step in if it does so at all? Money markets, those financial instruments tied to, dollars and bonds and everything else, have now priced in what could be 5 interest rate cuts by the Federal Reserve by the end of this year. Now, the Federal Reserve has not indicated that they are imminently going to do anything with interest rate policy, but that data that comes in is going to help guide what their decisions are. I would point out, though, how quickly the narrative, the story around the economy, the American economic system has shifted from being one that's a little bit more fearful of inflation. And yes, tariffs are inflationary, certainly in the short term. But what does it mean for the long-term prospects for the global economy and the U.S. economy? Right now, 10-year U.S. government bonds are trading with a yield of 4%. that kind of a level doesn't imply that there's any real fear of long-term growth or inflation at all. And that's the reason why a lot of traders are a little bit concerned about whether or not we are going to be in one environment where the economy is slowing down. I'll also point out that where the rubber meets the road for a lot of these companies out here in America is indicated by how the technology sector performs. It is by far the biggest part of the American stock market. Those types of companies, and even some of the billionaires who are the founders and CEOs of them, have lost billions and, in many cases, hundreds of billions of dollars for a certain group of people over the course of the last few days. So, Joe, Mika, Jonathan, this is a scenario where I'm not sure who the winners are or what the long-term plan is, but that's the conversation that's being had right now. What is the long-term plan, and how do you gauge success because of it?
Well, I guess the winners could only be the people who saw this coming and are shorting the market right now, because there are a lot of people who have lost $11 trillion.
Jonathan, this is a scenario where I'm not sure who the winners are or what the long-term plan is, but that
across the economy, and a lot of people really damaged by that. Dom, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
Greatly appreciate it. Let's bring columnist and member of the editorial board at the Financial Times, Jillian Tett. So, Jillian, U.S. stock markets right now getting pounded once again. Pretty rough night. Overnight in Asia, also in Europe. What's the view from Europe, from London, from the UK?
Well, the view right now, I think, is duck and cover, because what is happening is absolutely brutal. I mean, you've heard what's happened to the American stock market. If you look across the world indices as a whole, the numbers are dramatically worse in terms of how much has been wiped out. And just to cite one tiny example, Hong Kong this morning, or earlier today, fell by 13%. That's the worst fall they've had for decades in one day. And this really reflects three things that are weighing on sentiment. Firstly, it's increasingly clear that China is the number one target of the Trump tariffs, and China has not folded. On the contrary, it's actually doubling down in a way that's shocked many people. So we really are potentially heading for a full-blown US-China fight. Secondly, the economic impacts of all this are beginning to really seep through Wall Street. So you've seen a wave of investment banks downgrading forecasts quite significantly. But the third and really biggest thing of all is that the Trump team had an entire weekend to go out and clarify what they were doing and potentially talk about negotiations. And many people were betting they would do that. However, they haven't. And what I'm told by Trump's advisors is they have no intention of softening the blow or backing down. On the contrary, they're stressing that only half of Americans actually own stocks, and saying, well, this is a problem that's hitting the rich, but many ordinary people on Main Street are saying, yes, keep going with these policy reforms. This is going to reconfigure the American economy. And that's a very scary message for Wall Street, to be essentially kicked to the curb and told they don't matter.
And obviously, John Heilman, it not only impacts people on Wall Street, it's going to impact people on Main Street. The GDP that going down, inflation likely to go up. I'm curious about Republicans on the Hill. You have been talking about how Senate Republicans are actually signing up with Democrats to try to curb some of the president's power. Walk through that. As unlikely as it seems to be. Walk through the possibility of that as more Republicans in farm states and oil states and other states that are just getting hammered because of these tariffs and these losses. What's the likelihood that the Republicans in Congress will do anything to curb some of the worst after effects of these tariffs?
Right. Well, look, I mean, we have to keep the kind of neutral line here is that, we should never expect Republicans to do anything to curb Donald Trump. They haven't shown any predisposition to doing that. But I will say that there are now 7 Republicans co-sponsors on the Senate bill that was introduced at the end of last week to try to retake, and that's the important word here, retake power over tariffs to Congress. That is the Constitution gives power over this to Congress. One of the things that happened early this year when the Republican Congress was basically ceding all of its authority to Donald Trump on pretty much everything, one of the things that the Congress did was give Trump emergency powers to institute these tariffs with no congressional buy-in. And now you have this bill that's out there. Again, I want to be clear. I'm not saying that this is necessarily going to get passed in the Senate. It would face even a harder road in the House. But Joe, Mika, I mean, how many times have we seen even 7 Republican senators who've been willing to go against Donald Trump on anything and go against him so quickly as they have been on this? If the market turmoil continues throughout this week, you need another 6 to get to 60 votes to pass that bill in the Senate. I think if the market turmoil continues throughout this week, the prospect of getting another 6 Republican senators on board is pretty decent. The House will be a much bigger challenge for the reasons that we all understand, but there is now a Republican House co-sponsor to a similar, like a companion bill on the House side. Again, really hard to get it through a Republican House, given the loyalty to Trump there. But it's just the fact that there's even talk like this, or it's even plausible, remotely plausible, gives you a sense of how uneasy a lot of people are within the Republican Party about what Donald Trump is currently doing to the economy.
So, Gillian, give us a signpost for the next week or two. The White House does what you say, ignores Wall Street, persists with the tariffs as they are, implements them on the timescale that they are, said they're going to do. What happens then? Or we have some sort of a delay or a negotiation or some kind of rollback on the tariffs. What happens then? What are the kind of 2 directions we could be taking over the next week or 2?
Well, there are 3 directions. One direction is that Donald Trump does what many investors had always expected to do, which is to panic in the face of equity market collapses and really does something of a U-turn, softens the blow by getting out and talking to people, that we get some kind of US-China deal or some kind of conciliatory move. It's worth pointing out that the European Union has given itself 4 weeks to actually see what unfolds before it really reacts in full. So maybe we'll get some kind of rollback. The second possibility is that we get a situation where the Trump administration really sticks its heels in and keeps pushing the message that it's Main Street, not Wall Street, that it cares about, that this is for the benefit of American workers, that only half the population actually owns stocks, so why does anyone care? And really essentially demands that Americans take this very, very tough medicine on the basis that there will be long-term gain. That's a message they're putting out at the moment. If they follow through on that, expect to see a lot more equity market crashes, and we may also see some very dramatic responses in the bond market, because the great card that China has is a threat of selling US treasuries in a way that would cause treasury prices to go down and yields to spike up and causing more damage and pain. The third scenario, which is perhaps the most likely, is that the Trump team says it's not going to negotiate. They keep saying the N-word is not one they want to use at all, but they say that they're open to listening to whoever wants to come and talk to them. So we may see a whole stream of people coming in to talk to them, and people in the markets pinning their hopes that something among those conversations will soften the blow. But either way, it's going to be brutal.
Some really good points there. Gillian Tett of the Financial Times, thank you as always. 2 other data points here. First, that the Fed has announced it will be holding a closed board meeting a little later on this morning. And also, as of right now, this is now the worst 3-day performance for the S&P 500 since October of 1987 and Black Friday. We'll continue to keep an eye on these markets here. And also ahead, we're going to bring you a live report from Tel Aviv ahead of President Trump's meeting today at the White House with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. A lot going on today, where he and President Trump will discuss tariffs and later hold a joint press conference at the White House. It's Netanyahu's second trip to Washington since Trump's return to the Oval Office, and it comes on the heels of his controversial visit to Hungary. Joining us now, NBC News international correspondent Matt Bradley, who's live in Tel Aviv. Matt, good to see you. So lay out the stakes for us here in terms of this meeting at the White House, Netanyahu and Trump to speak about tariffs, to be sure, but also Gaza, the Middle East.
That's right, and Iran as well. It looks as though he was trying to check the temperature on whether or not Trump is really going to try to renegotiate some sort of deal with Iran, whether he's going to be continuing to crack down on Iran, as the threat from the Islamic Republic is felt very strongly, increasingly here in Israel. But you know what, Jonathan? It's really interesting that we're seeing Benjamin Netanyahu in Washington. This was a hastily arranged trip at the last minute. He had just been in Hungary, where he was meeting with another conservative leader, Viktor Orban. He made this trip very quickly. Last night, he met with the Commerce Secretary, Howard Lutnick, and now we're seeing that he's going to be meeting with Trump and meeting with the press in just a couple of hours. It sounds as though, based on what we're hearing from Israeli media reports, that he is optimistic that Trump will roll back some, if not all, of the 17% tariffs that he announced as part of that long list of tariffs that the president announced on countries throughout the world last week. So this looks like, we're going to start to see this more and more frequently. As again, I mentioned, Netanyahu, the first foreign leader to meet with Trump in person, to appeal to him personally to try to roll back those tariffs. But it comes as there's increasing controversy around the world facing off against Israel. 15 rescue workers were killed in the Gaza Strip late last month. And now we saw just over the weekend, the Israeli military gave a rare reversal of their version of events. They had said that those rescue workers had been approaching IDF positions and that their vehicles were unmarked, that their lights were not on, and that the Israelis opened fire in order to protect themselves. Now, there's video from the Palestinian Red Crescent that came out from the New York Times over the weekend that NBC News has also seen that shows that actually their lights were on. They were clearly marked as emergency vehicles. And now the IDF is saying that they were mistaken in their original assessment of that incident. So a rare reversal, and there are calls worldwide that are growing for an independent investigation. The Israelis have said that despite the fact that they were mistaken, as they said, in their first assessment, that they are going to be launching an internal investigation to find out exactly what happened. But let's see if that satisfies the growing calls to try to examine this outrage in the Gaza Strip from late last month. Jonathan.
NBC's Matt Bradley live in Tel Aviv. Thank you. And we should note the news conference scheduled with Trump and Netanyahu, 2:30 p.m. Certainly to be newsworthy when it comes to questions about tariffs, the economy, and the rest. MSNBC's coverage of the market plummeting will continue after this break.
On the road to Rafah, the unmistakable red and blue flashes of emergency vehicles driving in convoy towards Gazans in need. En route, they see another ambulance that appears to have veered off the road. Their vehicles and high-vis uniform clearly marked with the emblem of the Red Crescent. Little did they know that they themselves are about to become the victims. The video of apparent relentless Israeli fire
يما سامحيني يما هذه هي الطريقة اللي اخترتها يما إني أساعد الناس سامحيني يما.
For nearly 2 weeks, Israel has denied the apparent reality, claiming they opened fire on suspicious vehicles advancing towards them without headlights or emergency signals. The footage appears to directly contradict their version of events. It was discovered on a phone buried with the paramedic in a shallow mass grave, along with 14 of his colleagues and their vehicles. The Palestine Red Crescent Society said he'd been shot in the head.
This devastating incident represents the single most deadly attack on Red Cross Red Crescent workers anywhere in the world since 2017. These dedicated ambulance workers were responding to wounded people. They were humanitarians. They wore emblems that should have been protected. Their ambulances were clearly marked and they should have returned to the families. They did not. Even